one of the first things you have to understand are not necessarily who your enemy is, but who your allies are. We have allies all around us. You can't assume everyone's your enemy, but you also have to be smart enough to realize who you're fighting. And so, in a lot of the work, particularly in race and social justice, I will ask the question, well, who are we fighting? You're not fighting me. The harder work are really to identify what you can change. You can give a speech on the corner and shout out all of the truths you want. And then when you go home, the problem remains. The harder work is to figure out exactly what resources we have to bring to the table, we have to harness, and then what laws or policies need to be in place to truly change the world.
That's Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell talking about the hard work that's needed to fight injustice, racial, ethnic, and religious bias such as anti-Semitism, and all the other forms of discrimination we see every day in our city, our state, and our world. I'm Jeff Schwager, and you're listening to Confronting Hate Together, a joint production of the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, and the Wing Luc Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience. This podcast is part of a larger project which will include an exhibit premiering at Wing Luc on May 21st and an ongoing digital archive. We'll be talking to public officials, activists, religious leaders, artists, and everyday citizens about the ways in which we can join forces to make our communities safer, more just, and better places for everyone. Today we'll be talking to Mayor Harrell, State Representatives Sharon Tomiko Santos and Tana Senn, and Pastor Carey Anderson of Seattle's First AME Church, as we look at some of the many ways we are confronting hate together. Pastor Carey Anderson is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area. He is senior minister at Seattle's First AME Church, where he has been since November of 2004. Before that, he served as a pastor in Wichita, Kansas, and Reno, Nevada. Pastor Anderson is a linchpin of Seattle's African American community and has led the calls for racial equality, economic justice, and educational improvements throughout his tenure in our city.
First AME historically and the Black church historically has always been socially active. So we're a church, the AME church is a church of protest. We came out of a protest. We speak truth to power. And so we put feet to our prayers. And we see that alignment of separation between church and state is very, very blurred, because the Black church in its truest form shouts on Sunday, but we vote on Monday. And so we are very politically and socially engaged to educate and enhance the members of our church, the importance of being involved politically with our school board. Start there, getting involved in there. The PTAs, getting involved there. There is a thrust to always be socially conscious, and that comes from our pulpit primarily. And so for us to operate spiritually, there is always that social political aspect to church, the Black church.
That political aspect of his ministry is not restricted to the African American community. One important part of his role is to build bridges across communities. He leverages his experience dealing with discrimination against African Americans to help other communities in the region. That mission was never more important to him than when there was an alarming rise in anti-Asian hate during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The whole piece about Asian hate was real. And may I say, is real. And it just really sent chills up and down my spine when then president was talking about the Kung flu, how insensitive and how inflammatory and egregious those words are. When leadership is talking like that, it makes a difference. And so as a Black man, an African-American man, and I'm seeing hate perpetrated on the Asian community, I feel their pain. Now, October 7th of 2023 with the bombing that happened against my brothers, my Jewish brothers and sisters. I was one of the first ones to reach out to one of my rabbi brothers, Rabbi Daniel Weiner, and stood with the Jewish community in protest, stood with the Jewish community in their rallies. I went to the synagogue over at Temple de Hirsch. I brought a message there of peace and mobilization and to stand against hatred. These are the types of things that I think really enhances a community to really be whole. When your hurt is my hurt, and my hurt is your hurt. You are impacted, but so am I. I'm also impacted. Your tears become my tears, and my tears become your tears. I feel your pain because I've been in pain, but you too feel my pain because of the historic and systemic pain that you have had.
Pastor Anderson is eager to teach these lessons to young people in his congregation and community, who are the leaders, organizers, and coalition builders of tomorrow. He's also eager to teach them about the leaders of yesterday.
The civil rights movement was started by 20-somethings. Martin Luther King was 26 years old when he came to pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, and really mobilized the community. And so it's organization and it's mobilization. And so when you see hurt, when you see harm, when you see hatred, you can't strike back individually, but when we form coalitions, when we organize and form groups, we're stronger together. And so the Black Lives Movement is really the new movement of the civil rights movement. And you're standing on the shoulders of the Medgar Evers and the Martin Luther Kings and the Rosa Parks and those who were really young people making a difference.
Sharon Tomiko Santos represents Washington's 37th Legislative District. She was born in San Francisco and moved to Seattle when she was 9 years old. In the more than 50 years she has lived here, she has seen the city go through myriad changes, some for the better, some for the worse, and some with mixed results. As an example, she cites the end of redlining, where minority groups were restricted to certain neighborhoods like the Central District and the Chinatown International District. While it's undoubtedly a good thing that discriminatory housing practices are no longer tolerated, Representative Santos also sees community coalitions weakening because of certain groups moving out of their old neighborhoods.
If you were raised in and around Seattle, you know that the discriminatory housing laws prevented most people, unless you were frankly white, from living wherever they chose. The ability to live in a neighborhood was very much decided by the laws and the covenants that shaped our housing patterns. And so the community of the International District was so named because that's where the Asian Pacific American community was relegated. That was where many of our American Indian Native brothers and sisters lived and worked. And during the boom of post-World War II, where we saw lots of African American neighbors coming into the Seattle area, they also started in the International District. I think that contextualization is important because as people who were not wanted elsewhere, we were required to live together. As families were formed, the children of these different communities became friends, schoolmates, often boyfriends and girlfriends, and, resulting in many mixed marriages, so to speak, even as the discriminatory laws around where we could live started to relax. And so I think the idea of coalition building, collaboration, and community carried a very different sense then than it does today. Today, I feel like there is a lot of hardening of racial and religious tensions. I think that there is more transactional collaboration rather than community-based or interpersonal collaboration. And I think a lot of it has to do with living in more siloed neighborhoods as opposed to a true milieu of cultures and peoples and religious beliefs.
Representative Santos has spent her career in the legislature, which started in 1999, working to rebuild and strengthen the coalitions that make that collaboration succeed on a more personal level. Cross-community collaboration is especially important with groups like the LGBTQ+ community, who are members of every racial, ethnic, and religious group and must fight for acceptance wherever they come from. For Representative Santos, whose father was a United Methodist minister, her belief in working for equality is firmly planted in her faith.
Because I'm probably not what my father would recognize as a practicing United Methodist, but nonetheless, it shaped my my core belief system in the way I look at the world, which is to love thy neighbor as thyself. That sort of is a very, if you will, simplistic, but very profound notion of the value and worth of every person whom God has made perfect in his, her, their image. So to me, my message to the LGBTQ community is, first, you are perfect already. And there are people in the world who don't understand you. And it is the challenge that they have right now. But I would also hold out a hope that times can and do change. The communities that are perpetuating the misinformation, the discrimination, the hate, the bias, I would, first of all, probably communicate that, one, while I cannot change your hearts and minds through enacting legislation, do understand that I can and I will change the way you operate so that you are not bringing harm to a community because of your beliefs and your actions, because that is not okay.
Of course, the best time to shape someone's beliefs is in childhood, before dangerous or hateful ideologies have a chance to set in. Representative Santos chairs the House Education Committee, where her priorities include guaranteeing high-performance learning programs, ensuring a well-trained educator workforce, and eliminating educational inequities. She believes Washington State must provide excellence and opportunity to each and every student, giving them the tools they need to thrive in school and succeed in life. But those tools, Representative Santos believes, will only take students so far in confronting hate and bias.
I think education provides an important pathway to developing sort of the historical and, if you will, the intellectual or academic understanding of how do other people live, experience life, worship, really survive and thrive. But it's no substitute, again, for the experiential learning that takes place when you are smack dab in the middle of experiencing the face-to-face impact of hatred, of discrimination, of bias, of threats, and stereotypes. We can all experience it in our own ways. It is important for us to create those kinds of pathways. I think that's why learning about the Holocaust is so important. I think it's why learning about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II is very important. It's why we have to understand the impacts of the Trail of Tears, or the multi-generational impact of slavery on not only individual welfare, but family experience and collective, if you will, psyche.
Even with all of these efforts, education is not a substitute for the most important tool in confronting hate and bias.
Education is not a replacement for relationships. That is how we actually confront hate, is by developing personal bonds and being involved in one another's day-to-day lives.
Representative Santos's colleague in the Washington State House, Tana Senn, has represented the 41st Legislative District since 2013. She is the granddaughter of Holocaust refugees and grew up in Los Angeles in a home steeped in the ideas of social justice, equality, and diversity. In recent years, she has watched with dismay as social norms have broken down and hateful rhetoric has become commonplace in the public sphere, leading to dangerous situations for both everyday citizens and elected officials.
It is pretty stark, the increase in hatred, frankly, since Trump was elected. There's no question about the hate towards elected officials. I think people being able to, feeling like they're able to say anything they want without a filter of what may or may not be appropriate or safe or sane. And I think that has definitely put a extra level of difficulty in serving as a public official. I mean, even last year when we passed legislation to protect people from intimidation, from guns in election offices, right? In voting areas, the fact that we would have to even do that, but we did, we had to. I mean, people, you saw it not only just in Georgia, which obviously was a very national case, but here in Washington, people were being threatened just for counting ballots. And that's a real attack on our democracy.
For Representative Senn and members of her community, what's worse are the acts of vandalism and bullying they've experienced since the October 7th attack on Israel by the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas. She hears echoes of the brutality her ancestors endured in the Holocaust in those acts of hate.
Because hate crimes is really about intimidation, right? And that's why it's a hate crime and not just an assault or vandalism. It's because it's meant to, and it really does create fear across an entire community. The younger generations, and as people are further and further removed from the Holocaust and from, that horrible time in our society, in our world, I think young people have been like, yeah, anti-Semitism doesn't exist. Come on, like you guys are exaggerating it. This is just, old world people being concerned about it. And October 8th, boom. Young people heard, recognized, and felt that anti-Semitism still exists. It was really, a sad eye-opening, but I think every generation, we need to experience it ourselves in order for it to really sink in. And sadly, every generation does learn that.
Representative Senn feels hatred in the form of anti-Semitism most acutely on a personal level because of her family history. But she is quick to point out the increase in hate towards minority groups across our society. At the same time, she recognizes that here in Washington state, unlike some parts of the country, voices like hers calling for equality are abundant and amplified in the halls of power. She says that's particularly important for people who are most frequently targeted for hate crimes, like those in the LGBTQ plus community.
I am so happy to be living in Washington state. The past couple years, seeing all the anti-trans legislation, let alone rhetoric, across our nation has been, terrifying and heartbreaking. A few years ago, I met when Twitter was still Twitter, I met a rabbi from Missouri, and we ended up actually writing an op-ed together about the Jewish perspective on reproductive rights, on abortion, in the San Francisco Chronicle. So it was kind of this funny connection, small world Jewish social media connection. And anyway, it turned out he also was advocating really strongly for trans rights. He has a trans child. And so watching what was going on in Missouri as we in Washington state were working to protect our youth and to make sure that they had all the mental health and the access to gender affirming care, and that they had the supports they need, while in Missouri they were, trying to make sure that not only were they not fined or denied health care, but that they weren't being tracked down. And it was terrifying. And just the tale of two states, if you will, was just going on. So again, so grateful to be here in Washington state.
Mayor Bruce Harrell has lived in Seattle his whole life. His father was born in New Orleans and came to Seattle with his family when he was 11. His mother, a Seattle native, was incarcerated with her family as a Japanese-American child during World War II. His parents met at Garfield High School and married after Mayor Harrell's father got back from the U.S.-Korean War. Mayor Harrell followed in his parents' footsteps, attending Garfield High. There, he was class valedictorian and an all-city linebacker, earning a football scholarship to the University of Washington. There, he got his bachelor's and law degrees. He was first elected to the Seattle City Council in 2007 and became the city's mayor in 2022. I began by asking Mayor Harrell, a lifelong biracial resident of Seattle, what his own experiences have been like confronting hate.
I don't think, in my personal experience, I have experienced a lot of hate based on my race or ethnicity. I don't think. When people hate you, sometimes they don't say why. Right? I think that I get a lot of microaggressions and disrespectful conduct that I think is clearly racially motivated. But I have to admit that for my wife, as an African American woman, I mean, she's been called vile words, the N-word, things like that, by people rolling down their window. I've witnessed that. Me, because maybe because I'm a big guy or something, I can't say I had all of those experiences as an adult. I did as a child here in the 60s and early 70s. But I continue to see microaggressions, and I continue to say that it makes me stronger. It makes me more resolute in trying to always do what is right.
Doing what's right can be tricky, especially when dealing with differing sides of a difficult issue. Since last October, Mayor Harrell has tried to bring together members of the Jewish and Muslim communities to lower the temperature in light of the war in the Middle East. As mayor of a city far away from the zone of conflict, he can't hope to solve an issue that has frustrated generations of well-meaning politicians. But he's done his best to try to keep the peace here in the Pacific Northwest.
When I meet with members of the Jewish community, that they make it very, very clear that there's diversity within the Jewish community. Many of them understand the concept of a two-state, and a lot of them are not, by any stretch of the imagination, anti-Muslim or anti-Palestinian. And they're saying we we are Jewish and we are proud of our Jewish heritage, but we are very diverse from within. And when I met with the Palestinian leaders, it was a very common theme that many of them are very close to the members of the Jewish community. And they're saying we are not in any way anti-Semitic. We treasure our Jewish friends, but we're trying to get to a solution against the violence. And so I've pulled together these different groups, met with them on occasion, try to have some meetings collectively, and sometimes we do it virtually. I've seen where my work has been really good at trying to bring the groups together, have rational conversations, all toward the same thing, which is one word, and that is peace.
Spending time with Mayor Harrell, it's hard not to be inspired by his positivity and optimism. He exudes the sense that if he can get in a room with anyone, they can work together to solve their problems and dissolve their differences. At 65 years old, he's seen Seattle grow and evolve while watching our society's experience of hate and bias evolve with it, as some people seek to exploit our differences for their own ends. I asked Mayor Harrell how he sees the challenge of confronting hate evolving as he's reached the latest pinnacle of a remarkable life.
So I think your perception of hate changes as you get older. Now, right now, with the level of international conflict, anti-Asian hate, anti-Semitism, anti-Islamic or Muslim activities, it's as persistent and as clear as it's ever been. And I think, again, looking at some hatred coming from the far right, hate, there's always fear behind hate. And there's a lot of fear of others. It's easy to hate people that you are afraid of. And I think that we have new levels of fear. So for me, the answer toward addressing hate now and in the past has always been to break through the differences and get toward the common ground. And I think I could find common ground with any human being on earth.
I'm Jeff Schwager, and you've been listening to Confronting Hate Together, a joint production of the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, and the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience. Our thanks to Mayor Bruce Harrell, Representatives Sharon, Tomiko, Santos, and Tana, Senn, and Pastor Carey Anderson for sharing their insights with us on today's program. Join us for additional episodes in which we'll talk to leaders of the Asian, Black, and Jewish communities about the challenges we all face every day as we work to make Washington State a better place by confronting hate together. Special thanks to our lead project sponsor, the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods, and our major sponsors, the For Culture Heritage Project and the National Park Foundation. Thanks as well to the Washington State Historical Society for their Diversity and Local History Internship Grant. This program was written and produced by Jeff Schwager and edited and engineered by Kamna Shastri. Additional assistance was provided by Jackie Peterson and our interns, Shania Black and Daniel Sauter. Executive producers Cassie Chin, Stephanie Johnson-Tolliver, and Lisa Kranzler.